The abrupt surge of human lifespan to 200 years, coupled with a century-long youth, shook the very foundations of education and career paradigms. Lisandra Vireo, a renowned sociologist, immersed herself in this transformative era, meticulously chronicling how society restructured itself around this newfound longevity. Where once education was a prelude to a 40 or 50-year career, it now stretched indefinitely, mirroring the expanded human lifespan. Youngsters of today no longer rush through schooling. Rather, they embark on prolonged intellectual journeys, frequently pivoting between diverse disciplines, forging identities that evolve with decades. Lysandra often pondered how her friend Kaylin Dravik's business ventures thrived in this climate of constant reinvention, the entrepreneur harnessing the power of lifelong learning to fuel innovation. Formal degrees lost their earlier rigidity, replaced by modular adaptive learning frameworks, encouraging individuals to explore previously uncharted knowledge terrain every decade or so. Marcellus Thon, the venerable scientist whose breakthroughs extended life expectancy, witnessed firsthand how his medicine ignited this educational renaissance. He mused over the profound irony. His efforts aimed at prolonging life had unleashed a hunger for knowledge that could last a lifetime. Students matriculating at 70 or 80 were not anomalies, but rather the norm. The old stereotype of the 20-something graduate seeking a stable job gave way to a vast mosaic of academic ambitions, with late bloomers and lifelong scholars populating universities like never before. Lysandra's research illuminated this compelling shift. Education ceased to be a singular phase, morphing into a continuous, dynamic process. Career trajectories adapted accordingly, reflecting profound social metamorphoses. Work was no longer confined to a single profession or company. Instead, it became an episodic adventure across fields. Individuals now averaged 5 or 6 career changes, seeking fulfillment and challenge multiple times over their extended lives. Retirement, as previously conceived, faded into obscurity, with many preferring to scale back or pivot rather than cease work altogether. Lysandra noted the anecdotal accounts of Thaddeus Caldor, a resistant politician who decried these shifts as perilous distractions from national productivity. Yet even he could not deny the emerging reality where a person might fully reinvent themselves at 150 or beyond. With middle age deferred to the 80 or 90-year mark, the traditional midlife crisis found new expression. Not a moment of despair in one's 40s, but a profound existential reckoning occurring centuries later, demanding fresh coping mechanisms and support networks. Family structures evolved in tandem with these sweeping changes. Multi-generational households multiplied, with as many as 5 or 6 generations cohabiting, sharing wisdom and emotional bonds unheard of in previous eras. Relationships extended over centuries, and marriage endured for centuries. Yet paradoxically, long unions often faced periods of reevaluation and even amicable separations after many decades. Lysandra reflected on dialogues with Ira Selen, a psychologist specializing in longevity's emotional landscape, who explained these shifts as natural adaptations to sprawling life narratives. Parenthood transformed as well, becoming a prolonged mentorship rather than a fleeting phase. Generational boundaries blurred. Heredity and legacy gained fresh meaning in the face of long-term planning across centuries. Sonara Vivan, a passionate advocate for youth rights, argued fiercely for recognition of younger generations' distinct experiences in this age of prolonged adulthood. New social norms and rituals blossomed in the soil of extended youth and lifespan. Coming of age ceremonies, once markers of early transitions into adulthood, evolved into rites of passage, marking new phases every few decades. Evolving social contracts emphasized mental health and lifelong learning as cornerstones of responsible citizenship. Kalin Dravik pioneered corporate cultures that wove these new values into their core ethos, promoting flexibility and periodic professional reinvention. Meanwhile, traditional patriarchies diluted, challenged by egalitarian ideologies that flourished amid intergenerational collaboration. Lysandra documented these phenomena meticulously, arguing that the social fabric had not just stretched temporally, but had become richer and more complex. Economically, the ramifications were profound and multifaceted. Public pension systems collapsed under the strain of unprecedented longevity, prompting radical overhaul. Governments scrambled to redefine retirement age that now sprawled into the late 100s or beyond. New insurance models emerged, focusing on wellness and prevention rather than reactive care. Kalin's industries thrived by targeting niches such as longevity wellness, adaptive education, and career transition services. Consumption patterns shifted towards sustainable, quality goods, reflecting awareness of enduring life horizons. Meanwhile, old markets tied to ephemeral products steadily declined. Lysandra's reports highlighted how economic policies had to reconcile resource distribution with growing populations, now teetering on the edge of overpopulation crises. In response, demographic strategies included sophisticated birth regulation policies and incentivized migration to off-world colonies. Space exploration, once a frontier curiosity, became a demographic necessity. Governments and private enterprises, like Kalin's corporates, collaborated on interplanetary habitation projects to ease terrestrial population pressures. International political tensions flared as resources became scarcer, but also led to unprecedented diplomatic innovations, balancing competing age cohorts' rights. Sunara's activism highlighted age-based voting reforms, advocating for younger generations' political voice amid dominant elder populations. Meanwhile, Thaddeus Caldor maneuvered politically, tugging between openness to reform and conservative retention of power, embodying the era's contested governance landscape. On the psychological plane, humanity grappled with novel existential dilemmas born from elongated lifespans. Dorian Halsey, the philosopher and writer, delved into the vast emotional territories of such temporal extension. He noted a pervasive undercurrent of boredom and search for meaning, catalyzing new philosophical and spiritual movements. Era described how ancient religious practices entwined with emerging mindfulness disciplines, offering solace and purpose amid the vast expanse of time. Death, once an ever-present specter, became a more abstract concept, shifting attitudes to embrace its inevitability with calm acceptance, or paradoxically, growing denial. New psychological disorders surfaced, including chronic ennui and identity diffusion, challenging mental health disciplines to innovate therapies aligned with prolonged lifespans. Lysandra's conversations with Dorian revealed a cultural revaluation of time itself. Whereas before life was measured in decades, now it was an unfolding saga whose chapters numbered by centuries. People had to constantly renew their goals, passions, and connections. Her analysis portrayed a society at a crossroads, balancing the miraculous gift of time against its profound burdens. The impending chapter of her study would probe social cohesion's fragile threads in this new era, anticipating the tensions arising from such profound temporal expansion. As Lysandra prepared to explore these dimensions, the canvas of human experience continued to stretch, inviting both hope and caution for the chapters yet unwritten. Трансформация семьи и социальных отношений. The sudden extension of the human lifespan to 200 years, coupled with youth lasting a full 100 years, sparked a profound metamorphosis in the structure of families and social relationships. Lysandra Vireo, a prominent sociologist deeply engrossed in analyzing these seismic shifts, observed that households now commonly hosted 4 to 5 living generations, a stark contrast to the past's typical 2 or 3. This unprecedented coexistence transformed daily dynamics as each generation's worldview intersected over extended periods, requiring new mechanisms for communication and mutual understanding. In the bustling metropolis where Lysandra conducted much of her fieldwork, the interplay between age groups became a tapestry of cooperation and conflict. Sonara Viven, a vibrant young activist, represented those born after the lifespan revolution. She tirelessly campaigned for the amplification of youth voices within family decision-making, questioning traditional hierarchies that seemed archaic amid such longevity. Her brother, Kalin Dravik, a shrewd entrepreneur steering corporations that catered to the needs of centuries-long life, approached familial bonds from the perspective of legacy and enterprise, advocating for multi-generational collaboration to foster innovation. Marriages, once flimsy constructs measured in decades, evolved into relationships that could endure for centuries. Yet paradoxically, the incidence of divorces surged after 50 years of partnership became common. Era Solen, a psychologist specializing in psychological longevity, explained that as individuals experience multiple phases of life within one partnership, evolving goals and identities often led to amicable separations rather than lifelong entanglements grounded solely in social expectation. Lysandra noted a societal shift to serial partnerships, where love and companionship were renegotiated several times, even across centuries, rendering the concept of eternal marriage as understood before almost obsolete. Parenthood underwent seismic changes as well. With century-long youth, parenting stretched across very different decades, making couples often guardians for over 100 years of their children's life, creating new emotional rhythms. Sonara remarked how intergenerational teaching blossomed as grandparents actively participated in the upbringing and education of great-grandchildren, delivering wisdom accumulated over ages. However, this also raised dilemmas about autonomy and privacy. Dorian Halsey, a philosopher fascinated by existential questions, posited that children struggled to develop independent identities when surrounded by a deep collective memory and constant guidance from vastly older relatives. Inheritance and legacy took on new dimensions in this society. Kalin's ventures capitalized on complex, multi-generational asset management, designing trusts and agreements that accounted for the financial stability and ambitions of descendants centuries away. Nevertheless, Thaddeus Caldor, a powerful political figure, vehemently opposed some of these innovations, arguing they concentrated wealth excessively and hindered social mobility, igniting heated debates on equitable distribution amidst this extended longevity. Lysandra documented that traditional clan loyalty and family reputation remained crucial, but their expression morphed to navigate extended timelines and expanded interpersonal networks. Social norms and rituals adapted to reflect these new realities. Birthdays and anniversaries were no longer mere milestones, but epochs within vast familial sagas, celebrated with immersive storytelling and the sharing of memories stored digitally, sometimes traced back generations. Couples held centennial vow renewals, ceremonies that blended symbolisms of renewal and reverence for time past. Divorce, while socially accepted, required elaborate rituals of closure to honor the shared centuries. Lysandra observed that forgiveness and conflict resolution practices deepened, emphasizing sustained empathy over immediate resolution due to the heaviness of long term relational investment. Communities developed elaborate structures to balance the voices of many generations. Consensus building forums and age diverse council bodies emerged, inspired by models from elder councils, but expanded to integrate youth perspectives and hybrid identities formed over decades. ERA highlighted the psychological necessity of such frameworks for individuals navigating shifting familial responsibilities and identity phases, as the midlife crisis now typically occurred between 80 and 100 years of age, forcing individuals to reassess careers, relationships, and personal purpose on an epic scale. Conversations with Marcellus Thane, the venerable scientist credited with breakthrough medical advances that extended life, revealed his reflections on unintended social consequences. Medical triumphs that allowed bodies to remain youthful often clashed with psychological well-being, as mental adaptation lagged behind physical vitality. Marcellus noted that while the physical capacity for work and activity extended, the stamina for emotional endurance was varied, complicating familial roles as elder generations fluctuated between vigorous participation and periods of withdrawal. The multi-layered family structures gave rise to nuanced political conversations as well. Sonara's activism emphasized youth representation, not merely as a birthright, but as essential to counterbalance the political clout garnered by elders living longer and wielding influence for centuries. Thaddeus, conservative and rooted in tradition, framed longevity as a privilege to be earned, resisting some shifts toward egalitarian reforms. The tension played out in legislation regulating voting rights, inheritance laws, and social welfare programs, with Lysandra chronicling the ongoing negotiation between stability and change. Remarkably, the expanded lifespan forced society to rethink the concept of lineage and immortality. Families strategized for prolonged heritage spanning centuries, while individuals wrestled with the meaning of personal impact over such extended horizons. Dorian often mused on the existential weight borne by those witnessing the slow fading of friends and ancestors over lifetimes, highlighting a collective grappling with the nature of time, memory, and identity. ERA's work brought to light the rise of novel spiritual movements that embraced cyclical views of life and death, blending ancient philosophies with futuristic sensibilities. In navigating the sprawling web of extended family relations, individuals encountered stressors unique to this new era. Psychological conditions analogous to boredom and meaninglessness, but magnified by sheer duration, became prominent. ERA's therapeutic approaches incorporated meditation and narrative therapy, helping people construct evolving life stories that maintained engagement. Lysandra's surveys revealed that social support, adaptive communication, and the ability to redefine roles were pivotal to well-being in these multi-generational contexts. As we reflect on these profound transformations in family and social relationships, the picture that emerges is simultaneously inspiring and daunting. The extraordinary gift of 2 centuries of life reshapes human bonds, stretching love, responsibility, and identity across time frames previously unimaginable. Yet looming challenges persist, managing generational power balances, ensuring emotional resilience, and fostering equitable opportunities amid longevity's sprawling terrain. These complexities set the stage for deep inquiries into economic adjustments and governance structures, inviting us to delve further into how society as a whole reorganizes to thrive under the weight and wonder of extended life. Экономика в эпоху двухсотлетней жизни. Lisandra Vireo sat quietly in the dimly lit chamber, her eyes scanning the thick report penned by Marcellus Thane, the venerable scientist whose groundbreaking discoveries extended human lifespan to 2 centuries. The sudden leap in longevity brought prosperity to some, but chaos to many. Marcellus's insights into economic transformation were profound, yet Lysandra felt the tension in the room as Thaddeus Caldor paced impatiently nearby. This influential politician, a staunch conservative, rejected radical reforms that targeted pension and insurance systems, fearing social instability. Our old models cannot sustain such an extended life, Marcellus began, voice calm yet urgent. We face an unprecedented shift in resource allocation, retirement planning, and market dynamics. In the past, people retired in their 60s, perhaps 70s, but now, with vitality lasting well beyond 100 years, retirement at 170 seemed realistic, albeit rare. The notion of retirement itself blurred as many chose to cycle through multiple careers, supported by reinvented pension schemes that encouraged lifelong contribution rather than a single endpoint. Kalen Dravik, head of one of the largest corporations pioneering new industries, stressed, "Our economy thrives on reinvention." People no longer serve decades in one job. They pivot, innovate, and drive growth. Lysandra nodded, reflecting on how education and professional development intertwined with these shifting economic demands. Yet, the question of sustaining social support systems troubled Sinara Vivan, the young activist championing youth rights. She feared older generations would monopolize resources and political power, leaving younger ones disenfranchised. If the voting age remains unchanged, the elderly might dominate decades after traditional retirement, she warned during a heated policy debate. Thaddeus countered, "Experience commands respect. Innovation is not solely the province of youth." Their exchange underscored growing societal rifts as demographics skewed towards prolonged elderhood. The skyrocketing population was Earth's most profound challenge. Birth rates had been rigorously controlled through state policies and voluntary family planning, reducing fertility rates to balance longevity. However, many viewed this as a compromise on fundamental human desires. To ease density stress, initiatives to colonize extraterrestrial habitats gained momentum. Marcellus revealed that, for the first time, a significant fraction of the workforce pursued careers in orbital settlements and lunar colonies, sprouting new markets far beyond terrestrial confines. Ara Solen, specializing in the psychology of extended lives, observed subtle psychological shifts influencing economic behavior. Longevity breeds both wisdom and existential fatigue. Consumption patterns have transformed. People invest not only in material goods, but also in experiences that rejuvenate purpose. Wellness industries expanded, blending medical science with spiritual practices, spearheaded by Era herself. Corporations, under Kalen's guidance, offered personalized longevity packages, combining advanced health interventions with mindfulness and community building services. Yet, Tensions simmered over resource allocation. Countries rich in technology but poor in natural resources faced heightened competition. International diplomacy evolved into complex negotiations, balancing ecological preservation and economic growth. Thaddeus remained skeptical of global cooperation, warning of new conflicts ignited by age old desires for dominance and access. Sonara urged for inclusive governance, advocating for structures that balanced generational equity and long term sustainability. In this economic rebirth, many traditional industries faded. Mass manufacturing evolved into bespoke production driven by hyper customization, fueled by AI and robotics. The service sector flourished, particularly in sectors dedicated to lifelong learning and health optimization. Educational institutions adapted, offering modular and continuous certification to accommodate career changes every 2 decades or less. Lysandra marveled at how society embraced learning as a constant journey, essential for navigating this elongated life course. Financial instruments matured to reflect uncertainty stretched across 2 centuries. Insurance companies devised multi-century policies incorporating health advances and shifting economic climates. Retirement funds morphed into dynamic accounts that individuals could access intermittently, fueling periods of study, travel, or entrepreneurship without penalty. This flexibility echoed the new social norm. Life was no longer linear but cyclical, a series of evolving roles rather than a singular trajectory. Families, too, redefined their place within the economy. Multi-generational households with 5 or 6 living generations became more common, pooling economic resources to ensure collective well-being. Marriages, often lasting over a century, adjusted to new social norms, where separation after decades together was accepted as personal growth rather than failure. Inheritance laws transformed to encourage philanthropy and community investment over hoarding wealth within a few heirs, driven by Lysandra's sociological research, highlighting these shifts' positive social outcomes. Nevertheless, the persistent worry of economic inequality lingered. While some relished the freedom afforded by longevity and wealth, vast populations struggled with employment precarity caused by constant career churn and automated labor. Kalin embraced corporate responsibility initiatives, funding retraining programs, and supporting social enterprises. Yet Thaddeus criticized what he labeled as overregulation, fearing that innovation might be stifled. This ideological struggle reflected deeper anxieties about balancing progress and tradition. Sonara's youth movement gained strength, advocating for systemic reform, campaigning to raise the voting age temporarily, or introduce quotas ensuring young people's voices influenced policy decisions affecting their futures. Era predicted that these generational tensions would become defining political battlegrounds as decades stretched before humanity. Marcellus, ever the scientist, reminded all of the delicate ecological limits that could tip economies into crisis without sustainable management of resources and careful stewardship of this newfound gift of prolonged life. The vastness of space colonization introduced new economic paradigms. Lunar and Martian colonies developed their own markets and financial systems, sometimes clashing with Earth-based powers over regulations and resource sharing. Lysandra noted in her fieldwork that such off-world settlements created microcosms of innovation and risk, where business models could be more experimental, potentially seeding economic models for future settlements beyond the solar system. As the centuries-long lives altered human ambition, consumption, and governance, societies learned to value adaptability over rigidity. This expanded temporal horizon encouraged investments in long-term projects, seldom viable before, including vast environmental restorations and cultural endeavors. However, the strain of maintaining economic equilibrium between growing populations, stretched resources, and social expectations remained an ever-present challenge, ripe with paradoxes and dilemmas. The interlace of scientific mastery, political ideology, economic innovation, and social activism crafted a complex mosaic of coexistence and conflict. Lysandra recognized that humanity was on the cusp of a new chapter, where the definition of prosperity must encompass far more than mere material wealth. Balancing longevity's blessings with equity and meaning would determine the legacy passed to future generations, whose lives might span centuries ahead. As the discussion between Marcellus and Thaddeus concluded, with interjections from Calin and Cynara, the fragile compromises shaping tomorrow's economic landscape seemed tenuous yet promising. This dynamic interplay of ideas and ambitions foreshadowed the psychological and existential complexities that Era and Dorian Halsey would soon examine in depth, paving the way toward understanding how humanity's spirit adapts to an existence stretched across 200 years. With economic challenges mapped and political fault lines visible, attention shifted toward the inner terrain, where the human psyche confronts the weight of extended time, forging new paths between meaning and purpose amid this profound transformation. Политические вызовы и социальное равновесие. Lysandra Vireo sat in the dimly lit conference room, her gaze fixed on the holographic display hovering before her. The latest demographic charts flashed vibrant hues, revealing the seismic shifts caused by the sudden extinction of human life to 2 centuries. Her mind raced as she analyzed how this unprecedented longevity had ruptured the previous political and social fabric. Beside her, Cynara Viven leaned forward, eyes aflame with purpose. The young activist's voice carried a tone of urgency. The older generation holds a disproportionate amount of power. Our voices are fading. We need equitable representation if society is to remain balanced. Lysandra nodded solemnly, recalling her many interviews with both the elderly and the youth. The aged, often centenarians, had amassed wealth, political influence, and social capital over decades. They wielded the vote vigorously, nearly monopolizing governance structures. Meanwhile, younger citizens struggled to secure seats at decision-making tables. The question was no longer simply about age, but about the fundamental rights to influence futures that spanned lifetimes longer than ever before. Thaddeus Caldor, the charismatic politician opposing radical reforms, had become the lightning rod of these tensions. Caldor's rhetoric appealed to tradition and stability. He argued that experience gained over multiple decades offered invaluable wisdom essential for governance. His campaign, backed by powerful elder coalitions, resisted lowering voting ages or establishing youth quotas. To him, longevity equated to seasoned insight, rather than a barrier to fresh perspectives. Lysandra found herself wrestling with the profound implications. Could an entrenched gerontocracy prevent societies from evolving under the strain of expanded lifespans? Adding layers of complexity was the crumbling old social contract concerning retirement and political tenure. With typical retirement ages extended well beyond 150, elected officials became fixtures, their policies reflecting a worldview shaped centuries earlier. Cynara pointed out that young voters often felt disenfranchised, fostering apathy or radicalization. Our futures hang in the balance. When age groups cannot see eye to eye, fractures deepen, she insisted. Yet Caldor dismissed these concerns as youthful impatience, calling for patience and gradual change. Behind closed doors, Lysandra and Ira Solen deliberated on the psychological toll such prolonged public life took on leaders. Ira, a psychologist specializing in longevity's impact on minds and souls, explained that cognitive fatigue and burnout had become epidemic among those in long-term power. Mental resilience wanes. Without renewal in leadership, policy innovation withers, Era warned. Lysandra scribbled notes, envisioning policy proposals promoting term limits and intergenerational councils to mitigate stagnation. Meanwhile, Kalin Dravik, a business titan presiding over emergent industries fueled by longevity technologies, spotlighted economic tensions deeply interwoven with political struggles. The surge of centurions with accumulated wealth aggravated wealth disparities. Markets, segmented into age cohorts, competing fiercely for scarce resources. Public pensions strained, taxes on mature populations escalated, yet demands for younger generation support systems multiplied. Kalin advocated for redistributive economic models, integrating all age groups, though critics deemed these reforms as undermining meritocratic principles cherished by elder elites. Migration to off-world colonies emerged as one partial solution to demographic pressures, though fraught with political ramifications on Earth. Countries with advanced space programs encouraged youth to settle beyond, relieving terrestrial population density. However, access was unequal, breeding new forms of geopolitical competition. Sinara vocally opposed such exclusionary policies, asserting that new frontiers should not become playgrounds for the privileged young or exclusive refugees for the affluent longevity elite. Lysandra pondered these fragments of a society fracturing along temporal lines, young versus old, earthbound versus cosmic settlers. Compounding unrest were disagreements over resource allocation amidst environmental degradation and dwindling natural reserves. Elders insisted on preserving stability through cautious resource management, while youth demanded urgent radical shifts to sustain long-term survival. Thaddeus Caldor's hardline stance on conservative stewardship clashed publicly with youthful activists rallying for climate justice interlaced with socio-political renewal. The political stage thus became an arena for existential debates tied irrevocably to lifespan extension. Into these conflicts stepped Marcellus Thane, the venerable scientist whose groundbreaking medical breakthroughs had catalyzed longevity reality. Though aged over 250 years himself, Marcellus advocated for tempered adaptation. His decades of experience granted him nuanced perspective on societal fatigue and generational dynamics. Longevity is a gift-demanding evolution of our governance, he asserted to Lysandra in private dialogue, emphasizing the necessity of cross-generational empathy and institutional innovation to maintain social cohesion. Era contributed insights on emerging spiritual movements born from extended lifespans, blending metaphysical inquiries with political activism. Long life fostered profound reflections on legacy, mortality, and collective responsibility. New ritualistic practices emphasizing periodic societal renewal ceremonies gained traction, symbolically addressing the tensions between permanence and change. Such rituals, devised partly through Era's consultations, aimed to bridge gaps dividing citizens entrenched in vastly different life stages. In parallel, Dorian Halsey, an influential philosopher chronicling humanity's confrontation with infinite time, analyzed psychological rifts fueling political polarization. His essays explored the paradox of abundance versus existential dread, When lifetimes stretch wide, meaning often fragments under repetitive cycles. For some elders, power was a tether anchoring identity. For youth, disruption was a pathway to meaning. These contrasting impulses fueled political battles where compromise felt elusive. Sinara's grassroots campaigns polarized communities by foregrounding age-based justice. She and Lysandra crossed ideological divides with cautious optimism, envisioning new frameworks honoring both longevity's promise and its challenges. Dialogues convened across virtual forums, town halls, and international assemblies sought consensus but grappled with deep-rooted mistrust. Ultimately, these debates became reflections of humanity's effort to redefine life, power, and belonging in an era where 2 centuries became the new normal. As political factions hardened, Lysandra sensed the looming necessity of structural overhaul. Electoral reforms, balanced representation mechanisms, and integration of longevity psychology would be essential to preserve democratic vitality. The challenge was monumental: how to blend the wisdom of centuries with the innovation of youth, preventing either dominance or marginalization. When the political pendulum swings between preservation and transformation, society's survival depended on finding harmony within diversity intensified by extraordinary lifespan. Standing at this crossroads, Lysandra and Sonara prepared to present their findings and recommendations at the upcoming Global Longevity Summit. Their conclusions underscored that the greatest political challenge was not managing an increased population or immutable lifespans, but cultivating social equilibrium amid shifting generational tides. The fate of earthly societies wove through every negotiation table, every protest rally, and every quiet moment of individual reflection shaped by extended time. Yet their work was far from complete. Lysandra mused on how this political and social balance would influence broader cultural, economic, and psychological spectra. As the world grappled with political upheaval born from longevity's gift, the forthcoming chapter promised to delve into the deeper inner transformations shaping human experience beyond institutional walls. Together with her colleagues, Lysandra knew that understanding the mind's journey through extended epochs would be pivotal to sustaining hope, purpose, and unity in this extraordinary new age of humanity. Психология вечной молодости и поиски смысла. Lysandra Vareo scanned the crowded conference hall, her mind swirling with data and insights collected over the past decade. The extraordinary leap in human longevity, where the average lifespan surged to 200 years and youth extended to a full century, rewired the very core of societal function. But beyond the sociological structures, the unseen battles swept through the minds and souls of individuals, posing profound questions about identity, purpose, and meaning. At this intersection, Ira Selen and Dorian Halsey stood at the forefront, dissecting how people wrestled with the psychological labyrinth of eternal life. Ira's voice resonated with quiet authority as she explained, with youth spanning 100 years, the traditional notions of early adulthood have faded. People no longer feel pressured to settle down quickly. Instead, they explore multiple careers, relationships, and philosophies, often over several decades. This extended period fosters both liberation and turmoil. Individuals like Lysandra herself witness the burden of endless options, where indecision morphs into existential fatigue. The struggle is no longer just survival, but discovering what truly ignites one's spirit amid boundless time, Ira added. Dorian, with his characteristic reflective tone, contributed, The age-old human quest for meaning has intensified rather than diminished. The paradox of endless life is the risk of eternal ennui. Countless individuals find themselves in prolonged existential crises as their personal narratives stretch well beyond previous limits. His recent essays portrayed how narratives, long celebrated as the fabric of identity, become unwieldy. We see a proliferation of new philosophies and spiritual teachings aimed at guiding such elongated lives toward renewed relevance. Marcellus Thane, the venerable scientist who unlocked medical breakthroughs enabling this longevity, often mused on unintended consequences. His innovations stopped biological decay, yet they had not eradicated the psychological shadows of endless existence. Psychological disorders, once rare, such as chronic despair linked to meaninglessness, have surged. What I did not foresee, Marcellus confessed in private seminars to Lysandra, was the void, a form of temporal dislocation where decades no longer feel lived but merely endured. New spiritual movements blossomed under these pressures. Ira detailed the rise of temporal mindfulness, a practice emphasizing presence in an elongated lifespan. Retreats operate globally, attracting thousands seeking to root themselves in moments rather than endless plans. Meanwhile, philosophical circles, invigorated by Dorian's writings, debated the ethics of immortality, proposing that the search for meaning might demand reinventing death, acceptance altogether. The transformation penetrated social dynamics profoundly. Extended youth created generations overlapping for centuries, redefining family bonds and personal legacies. Sonara Viven, a fiery young activist, often questioned the prevailing structures. If life stretches twice as long, why must power remain concentrated in older generations? She challenged during a televised debate with Thaddeus Caldor, whose conservative stance opposed accelerated social reforms. This clash highlighted a fundamental tension. Younger cohorts clamoring for influence, while traditional hierarchies resisted volatility. Marriages expanded in scope, often lasting a century or more, but paradoxically, divorces became more frequent after 50 years, illuminating how extended companionships evolve through phases of passion, companionship, or estrangement. Lysandra's sociological studies revealed the emergence of serial commitments, where individuals cyclically renew or dissolve bonds as personal goals shift. The concept of inheritance transformed from material legacy to intellectual and emotional heritage, promoting prolonged mentorship networks instead of straightforward generational transfers. The psychological toll of this longevity cannot be overstated. Anxiety about dwindling time lost urgency, but conversely, an overwhelming freedom bred moments of paralyzing choice overload. Depression and alienation symptoms skyrocketed as people wrestled with feelings of invisibility and historical displacement. Dorian captured this in his latest work titled The Endless Hourglass, portraying protagonists trapped in the suffocating abundance of time. Conversely, resilience emerged among those finding solace in long-term, creative pursuits or radical reinventions of selfhood. Lysandra recounted individuals who embraced life as a continuous art form, blending identities and careers multiple times over. Kalen Dravik, pioneering new industries catering to prolonged life needs, noted booming markets in psychological coaching, digital memory enhancements, and virtual reality simulations aimed at sparking novel experiences. Politically, Thaddeus Caldor argued that the social fabric frayed as the contest between age groups intensified. debates raged on voter eligibility and the rights of elderly citizens whose life experience spanned centuries. Demographic challenges brought fears of overpopulation, compelling expansionist ambitions, such as colonizing distant planets. These grand ventures, led by corporations like Kalen's, drew protests from Sonara's movement advocating sustainable limits and equitable resource distribution. Amid this vast societal upheaval, the psyche remained a battlefield of meaning. Ira emphasized how traditional mental health models adapted, integrating spiritual and existential therapies alongside medication. New diagnoses emerged, reflecting the uniqueness of an extended lifespan. Chronofatigue, a condition involving emotional exhaustion from temporal disorientation, became widespread. Support groups, often led by philosophical guides, including Dorian, provided community spaces where people publicly grappled with infinite horizons. Lysandra's fieldwork uncovered striking narratives that resisted reduction to pathology. Some described transcendent experiences after decades of struggle, epiphanies rekindling purpose through mentoring, art, or activism. Others embraced cyclical reinvention, embodying a radical fluidity of identity unheard of before. These cases hint at an evolving human capacity to adapt to realities once confined to science fiction. As this era unfolds, the fundamental challenges remain. How does one craft a life rich in meaning when time itself expands limitlessly? How do societies balance longevity's gifts with its disorienting psychological demands? Lysandra often thought of Marcellus's words, "We created time without end, but the soul's journey within it is still uncharted." The tension between eternal life and eternal restlessness pulses at the heart of humanity's greatest experiment. This exploration of enduring youth and the search for significance sets the stage for examining the technological and ethical complexities that weave through our prolonged existence. The journey through personal and collective transformations continues, beckoning inquiry into the innovations shaping these uncharted futures.